I Don't Know Yet is not affiliated with any specific 12-step fellowship. The content put forth are the thoughts, opinions, and experiences of the host and guests. It is meant to be suggestive only and is in no way a reflection on how to work the steps in any fellowship or how to work any other recovery program. Hey guys, we are back. I'm with Sierra today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Really, really happy to have you. I'm actually really excited about doing this episode with you because while I've seen you a lot and I've, had an opportunity to hang out with you in a bunch of different areas, we haven't really had a one-on-one conversation before. So
No, we haven't.
yeah, so this is really exciting for me.
It is.
Yeah. So what are we talking about today? How?
Yeah, the how.
Okay. For anyone who doesn't know, what does that mean?
Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness.
Okay. Perfect. So let's talk about honesty. Do you want to talk about early recovery or where you're at now or?
It started with early recovery. I had to be able to get honest with myself. The fact that I was an addict, to be able to get a start with anything.
And what was that like for you to have to get honest with yourself about that?
It wasn't easy in the beginning, and it took a lot of pain for me to get to that point where I could be honest. And, the facts were all there right in front of me. So I would just be continuing to lie to myself if I didn't decide to get honest and do something to change it.
Okay. And so when you made that decision, how did honesty impact your ability to move forward in early recovery?
I was able to finally reach out for help and to look into what I needed to do and what that looked like. As to where, before, while I was still in denial, I didn't even really have any idea at all what I needed to do and what the steps or the process would be.
Right.
Yeah.
It was funny when I was thinking about this topic and kind of just little things that I could add to the conversation. It was interesting because I was just praying on it and an instance came up that I had completely forgotten that happened. And I was like, I definitely want to share that one. And it's funny because, my journey started with being court mandated, right? So I wasn't ready, to be honest with myself. They threw me into it and I'm like, well, I'm here. I might as well give this a try. But I remember during COVID, I had finished treatment and my parents had asked me a question about money. And the lie went through my lips so fast. I didn't realize how reactionary, like how much practice I had at being an addict in active addiction and how built we are at creating these webs of lies. And it left my mouth so fast. And it was about 5 minutes after I said the lie before I recognized that I had lied through my teeth about it. But then I just didn't have the courage to say anything, right? And I just sat there and I let it happen. And that was one of the really cool earmarks of the beginning of my journey because I remember I got in my car, I left, and I just felt this weight on me. And I actually had to pull over because I was so upset with myself. I was so disappointed with myself. And I just started bawling my face off. And I'm like, this is the kind of shit that's been keeping me sick.
Yeah.
And I pulled over and I called my parents. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I just lied through my teeth to you. And I don't remember, because it was so long ago now, I don't remember the details, but I kind of just remember my parents being like, wow, that's really cool of you. Like, good job. Way to be honest. That's awesome. Like, what a great step in the right direction. And I really, really like that story. But I find, early recovery is one thing, but I almost find really hardcore honesty gets harder.
Yep.
The further you go in recovery. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Absolutely. I definitely find it gets harder. I find just in the beginning, I was trying so hard to get to this certain point, right? And yeah, it's those ingrained behaviors you talked about. Sometimes I'll just lie about something that's not even worth lying about. And I'm catch myself in the moment. Why did I just say that? Why did I lie about that?
Right?
Just for no particular reason. It's just happens sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think the good part is being able to catch that,
And I think too, I don't know if you can relate to this, but I find that my deepest rooted defects are the ones that I act in without awareness until long after the pain of the consequences of acting out in them. But I find that the further I go in recovery, and I had this conversation at a meeting I was at where I outed myself to everybody a couple of weeks ago in tears. I don't know if it's just me or my defects or how my brain works, but I feel like I have a duty to show newcomers the program works because it does.
Yep.
Right. And I forget that it's okay to be human and it's okay to struggle. And I find that at least 2 or 3 times a year, I've put myself in a position where I'm screaming from the mountaintops of these podiums at meetings about how to work the steps. But inside, I'm actually struggling. And I find that being honest with myself and finally, like, it's honesty with other people I'm pretty good with now. But really being honest with myself sometimes, I feel like if I'm not on top of it all the time, that I'm failing.
Yep.
Do you ever feel like that?
No, I absolutely feel like that, and I can agree with that, right? And I think, yeah, being honest with where I'm at and what's actually going on. You know, it's so easy. I have like this thought sometimes where like I need to show up a certain way in the rooms and meetings and for other people. But it's dishonest. Like if I'm struggling, I'm struggling. And, you know, to be able to get up there and say like, look, I'm struggling. This is where I'm at, and this is what I know I need to do to get through it. That's showing that the program works too and how it does.
Right? And then you have those moments of vulnerability and 18 people come up to you and say, oh my God, I'm so glad you said something. I feel this, you know, like you get so much out of it. And then 6 months later, I'm like right back to the exact same thing where I'm like, I can't tell anybody that I'm struggling.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah, I've definitely been there. I don't know why I continue to have that struggle. It's just part of the journey, I guess, you know?
Good old addicts and our egos, right?
Yeah.
Got to make sure everyone knows we're killing it.
Dying inside.
Yeah. Gosh. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Is there anything else you want to talk about when it comes to honesty stuff?
No, like I just think, you know, it's the start. It's definitely the start and the continuum.
Mm-hmm.
And just being honest with myself completely, right? Because when I can be honest with myself, I can be honest with the people around me.
Yeah. And that's it, right? Like without being honest, you have nowhere to go. Or if you do go somewhere, it's not. The steps don't work.
Yeah.
If you don't get to the root of stuff. You can't get to the root if you're not honest about it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was funny. I remember a situation that I talk about actually often. I had someone ask me once, when did you know that step 9 was important? And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, well, you've talked many times about your sponsor every 6 months or so being like, how are your 9s coming? And I'm like, they're great. They're like, when did you know that step 9 was important? And it was like when I felt the depth and weight of not doing them.
Yes.
Right. And so I found that for myself, with that honesty piece, I learned how to be honest with myself most of the time, right? I learned how to be honest with other people. But the honesty of taking accountability for that next step forward with the 12 steps, that part is something that I haven't mastered yet. Because I haven't done all my amends yet. I've done a lot. But there's certain things of my life that being able to stand up and say, yeah, I did that in the eyes of someone that I hurt, that's tough.
It is.
It's something I still struggle with.
Yeah, I struggle with that too.
Yeah. Maybe this will be a great reminder for both of us to be like in a couple of weeks. Hey, have you made any amends?
Yeah, that's the way it goes. Hey.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, I guess let's talk about open-mindedness because I feel like that's a huge topic.
That's a huge one. Yeah.
That's a huge topic. What do you think when you think open-mindedness?
You know, I had to put aside everything I thought that I knew, even still everything that I think that I know. I had to become open-minded to just change everything. I had to become open-minded to learn new things, to do new things, to continue to do new things.
And how did you do that for somebody who's struggling with that right now?
You know, I just try to follow along with the people in front of me, take the suggestions that I heard. And, they say that like the open mindedness is like a huge part of it, right? I can't move forward and grow and change if I'm not willing to open my mind and see how I can do that, to change and do something different. And I think, I just had to do it the hard way. Anytime I wasn't willing to be open-minded and I didn't want to do like change or try something different, I struggled. And so, through pain and trial and error,
Sometimes several times.
yeah, I became more open-minded and, continue to become more open-minded because it's so easy to just close my mind and be like, think I know it all, right?
I know that a lot of women that I work with, when I hear the word open-minded, like the first thing that comes to mind is trying to convince an addict that there might just be a higher power out there.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yep.
And I've had a lot of instances of closed-minded people, right? That are like, they're so close to being there. And I remember like when I think back to the person that I was, like sometimes it's embarrassing when I honestly think about it. I was so close-minded and I was so sure that I knew everything. And I remember going through step 2 with my sponsor, and I remember them being like, "Are you willing to believe?" I'm like, "No, like I'm not. Like there's absolutely no way." And it was funny because she was very smart because she's like, "Why did you ask me to sponsor you?" I'm like, "Because I was told to find somebody that had what I wanted. You don't seem suicidal. You seem pretty happy, and you don't do drugs, and you don't drink. So, like, these are all the things that I want." And she said, "Okay, if I told you that without a shadow of a doubt, I know that there's actively a higher power working in my life, do you believe that I believe that?" And I'm like, "You're making it really hard for me to say no, because then I seem like a dick." And then I'm like, "Okay, yeah, like that makes sense." And so she's like, "Okay, that's we're on the way." And I think it's funny because I was so sure that I knew everything that at that moment, God, I was so cocky. At that moment, it's so hard to remember. I promised myself that I was going to do everything to the best of my ability to prove to everyone else that it didn't work because I knew better than everybody. But my higher power knew about my cockiness and how it worked because it ended up working in my favor because then I did everything to the best of my ability and it totally worked. And my life changed forever. But yeah, open-mindedness, I find that was a really like key piece for me. But I find just the same with honesty, right? Like the longer I go in recovery, open-mindedness also gets harder too.
Yep.
Because once you have a foundation, that ego comes back and it's like now you know things and you've got this and you've got a handle on it. And sometimes I need to take that bite of humble pie and be like, you don't know everything. You're a toddler. You don't even have 4 years yet. Shut up and listen to what this person has to say. Have you ever felt like that?
Oh, absolutely. I tell myself often, like, you do not know everything. There's still so much to learn, right? And I love talking to, like, my friends who have more time, and they're like, yeah, you're still an infant in this program. Like, you have so much to do, and I just have to remind myself of that. Like, and, unless I'm open-minded, I'm not growing. So.
Yeah. For a minute, I almost forgot what the W was. I was going to be like, okay, sounds like we've covered open-mindedness. Willingness is a good one, too. What do you think it means to be willing?
Willing to put aside, again, like everything that I think that I know. Willing to try something different. I am so stuck in my ways. Well, I thought I was so stuck in my ways of like the way I've gone through the steps and the programs that I attend and how I like to do it and my opinions on, say, other fellowships. And, I've gotten to this point where I've become willing to try something different and see how it could work for myself, right? Seeing that it can work for others and just knowing that I need that next step in my recovery, that level up. So willing to try something different.
And how have you found that that's had to transition over each year of your sobriety?
How it's had to transition?
Well, I just mean, like, I feel like every year, like, the things that worked for me the year before don't work for me the next
Oh,
year.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think, like, I don't necessarily see the growth. And, like, I get to the point where I feel like I've grown so much, but then I get to the point where I feel like I need to level it up. But, and then it's hard to see, like they talk about it in the spiritual experience, is how it's easier to see it in other people, but not ourselves. And, I think I get to the point, like, year to year or however often it is, where I see that, like, I need to do something more. I need to do something, whether that's different or, actually being willing to do the work that's laid out in front of me, right? Why am I struggling? Well, because I'm not doing my 10s and 11s. I need to be willing to do that. Is what I was doing before not working for me anymore? Well, I need to be willing to try something different, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's it's also, like, really good to point out how much willingness is in specific steps, right? Because, like, we talk about willingness in step 3,
Yep.
right? But I feel like it's very overlooked, the willingness that's needed in 6, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I had somebody on and we talked about it for like half an hour. But being able to sit down and have that checkpoint and review all your previous steps and review everything and be like, do you want to have this life anymore, or are you willing to change? And being able to sit for an hour, which most people don't get to, right? In that moment and say, yes, I'm willing to commit. Like, that's one thing, but actively showing that willingness and trying to act differently in 7, and then getting to your 8s and 9s, like, that's a whole nother ball game.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned the 6 and the 7, right? As I learn about these character defects or these behaviors, am I willing to change them? Am I willing to give them to God and let God help take them from me, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I need to pray for the willingness. Sometimes I need to pray for the willingness to pray for the willingness to be willing. I have to complicate it that much.
And I think it's so funny too, because, like, I didn't understand that when I first did 6 and 7. I had no idea. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, of course I want all of these things to be gone. Of course I do. And then, like, 6 months down the road, something will happen. And my brain is like, well, I already know that I'm bad in these areas, so I'm totally willing for those. But, like, this one, I think my way works pretty well. So I'm just going to hold on to that one.
Hold on to it, yeah.
It took me quite a while to be like, oh my gosh, I'm actually not willing in certain areas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, right? And, I think I definitely still get to that point, let's be honest.
Oh, 100%.
I was going to say sometimes, no, I definitely do, right? And through pain, I become more willing.
And I think that's something that's really important for everyone to remember, right? I'm going through a scenario right now with quite a few people that I've met in the rooms where the expectation seems to be that once you have a sponsor, someone who has completed the 12 steps, someone who's 12-stepped, whatever you want to call it, that they're suddenly this prime example of what a human being should be. And they can do no wrong. And then they're like, the expectation is there, right? And then these people find out that all of these sponsors are still just addicts that have to make mistakes to learn.
Yep.
It's interesting because, like, I find myself over the last few months, like, I've had to have several conversations being like, but, like, why are your expectations of this person so high? Right? They're not God. Like, they're literally just an addict that only learns from fucking it up.
Yeah. We're all the same,
Yeah.
Ugh.
And then I guess for willingness too, I found 10s and 11. It took me like 2 years to get good at 10s. I wasn't willing to do them because I didn't see them. Right? How do you be willing to do something you're completely unaware of?
Yeah.
And then after picking up enough stones, putting them in my pocket for every single one that I missed, feeling the weight of that, I did that. But I've also found over the last year, because, like, my first 3 years, I was like sponsor. And over the last year, a lot of things have come into my life that I have been working really hard to get to.
Yep.
Right. And so, and this is actually kind of the first time I'm outing myself with this. This is why I love these conversations. Guess what? Now the world can know. I've pulled back a little bit on sponsorship this year.
Yeah.
I've still done it, but like, you know how it is, right? So many people think they're willing until they get to a certain point and then they pull back. And I used to be very good with expectations and be like, this is what I need because I need to actively sponsor. And if I don't have these things, that I will find someone that needs me.
Yeah.
And I was just always so willing to sponsor, so willing to sponsor, so willing to sponsor. But then suddenly my emotional sobriety got a little better and things started coming back into my life. And I found myself over the last 3 weeks being like, I haven't been willing to stand up as an available sponsor in a meeting for months. But I'm not full up on sponsees. Interesting. And I'm like, why? I'm like, and this is something that's been new for me, right? Because as soon, like, I'm an addict. I'm selfish and self-centered and self-seeking to my core. And now that I'm getting all of these things back, it's just interesting how fast my brain can be like, take.
Yeah.
Right. And I had to really sit down with myself a few days ago and sit with my higher power and reflect on it. I'm like, holy shit, like I need to seek out somebody and start working fast.
Yeah.
Because apparently I forgot to be willing to sponsor somewhere down the road.
Yeah. I've definitely gotten, to that place numerous different times myself, right? Where I noticed like that willingness is pulling back and, I'm not sponsoring as much or I'm not doing as much service. And why? Life gets busy, life gets good, or things don't go the way that I think they should. And, that willingness slowly disappears. But then, things kind of shift a bit. They get a little bit painful and all of a sudden I'm very willing again,
Yeah.
I don't know why it needs to be that way.
Right? There should be an easier way. I guess that is the easier way.
Yeah.
It's better to learn through pain than to pick up.
Absolutely. This is the easier, softer way.
I don't like to do anything the easier, softer way when it comes to being in recovery, though. I love making mistakes.
Yeah. I think, I personally think I learn a lot more that way because, I don't know, I seem to pay more attention.
Yeah. Trying to think of other instances of willingness. Actually, I had an interesting conversation with a sponsee of mine a couple of days ago. She had let me know how many service positions she has. Pointing in the camera, pointing right at her because we've had this discussion. She has 6. And in my second year, I also had 6. And I think it's important, yes, like we need to talk about willingness and we need to talk about the ability to have the discipline to do these things. But at the same time, it's also important to look at that other side of it, right? I put myself in a position in my second year where I was so willing that I actually put myself in a really bad spot because I gave more than I had to give. Mm-hmm. And so there's a problem if you don't have enough willingness.
Yep.
But there's also that other end of the spectrum, right? And I ran myself so dry. Like my cup was so empty and I felt like I couldn't step down from anything. I felt like I couldn't disappoint people. I felt like if I said I could commit to this and that I couldn't, that I was a failure. And then I became unwilling and dishonest, right? All of these things that constantly are so important for us to be able to open up and just be like, I've taken on too much.
Yeah.
And like, that's a whole different side that I think it's like, I see a lot of people who just dive in head first, which is great. But if you're anything like me, you take on too much and then you spend 6 months in your room crying, being like, how do I manage all of this?
Yeah. I can totally relate. I did the exact same thing, right? Where I took on too much and, caused myself to burn out and almost like become resentful towards the amount that I was doing, right? And yeah, that totally goes good with this, right? Because I had to be able to take a look at that. Like, where does a character asset become like a defect, right? And when it's enough, I had to get honest with myself, right?
Right.
And then willing to do something to change it.
Yeah. I remember like one of the most interesting conversations I had with my sponsor about that at the time, because I was so burnt out. Like my defects were running so rampant and I didn't even see it. Fear of failure, and I need the validation, and I need people to tell me I'm doing a good job, and I have to be successful in all these things. And I'm just like, how could I possibly tell people that I can't do this?
Yeah.
And she just said, Jen, you're not doing it. How are like right now, you're doing a disservice to not only yourself, not only your creator, but your entire fellowship. You don't have the capacity to do this. It's very selfish to hold on to something you cannot do.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that made it a lot easier to be willing to let it go.
Yeah, it's a good different way to look at it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, being willing to like take a different approach, different look at things.
Yeah. Willingness.
I know. I think like the biggest model of willingness in my recovery for myself was, you know, I had done numerous sets of step fours, like numerous step fours, and at the top of every list was my mom. But I wasn't willing to like actually take a deeper look at it, you know, to change it, to do anything about it. And I'd started working with a new sponsor, and she wanted me to take a look at this. And it took me 8 months to write a step 4 on my mom. You know, I really had to pray for the willingness in this one. And this is like that instance where, you know, I prayed for the willingness, right? And then I had to get willing to like actually show up and do the 5 of it with my sponsor, and, you know, be open-minded to her feedback of what she had to say. You know, I may not have liked it in that moment, but it's absolutely what I needed to hear, right? And then, you know, I felt like there was a crunch period because my mom was leaving the country, and like just being willing to like go sit with her and make this amends, right?
Yeah.
That was like the biggest practice of willingness I had to make in my recovery, was being able to get through that, right?
I'm really, really glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Willingness applies in so many of the steps.
It really does.
That actually reminds me of 8 and 9.
Oh,
right?
Yep.
Yeah. Because I hear so many people that haven't got there yet, being like, I have sponsees that like are writing down their 4s and they're like, oh, I can't do that. And I'm like, we're not even there. Like, relax.
Yeah. Just don't even think about it
right?
yet.
Like this, you're telling it to me. You're not telling it to anybody else. But having, like, I remember going through, and, you know, my sponsor just said, like, of all of the stuff on your amends list, like, who are you willing to make amends to right now? And so I took a look, and then she's like, okay, well, who do you think you're not ready, but you could? And then I took a look, and then she's like, who do you absolutely not want to make amends to, even though you know you probably should? And then I had that list. And I think I didn't believe her when she said it, but I think it's fascinating that part of 7 and that character building comes from the honesty and the willingness to face that stuff in 8 and 9.
Yeah.
Right? Your character really, really builds when you take accountability for the people you hurt. And so, like, when I finally knocked everybody off my willing list, she's like, how is the people that maybe but not now? I'm like, oh, I'm totally willing now. And she's like, how about your never list? I'm like, yeah, now they're maybes. Right? And it's just really cool to see that the more internal work and the more you actually work the program, some of that willingness just kind of comes on its own, because with your character building.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. That willingness just comes on its own, especially with seeing, like, as you go through with those ones that you're willing to do, right? And I don't know, the feeling you get, you know what I mean? That feeling you get once you start making these amends and, you know, cleaning up the wreckage from our past, and that helps become more willing.
Yeah. Because after a while, you really start to just feel like a different person. And I think for me, like, anyone who knows me knows that I'm an emotional being and I cry all of the time. Doesn't matter if I'm too happy or I'm too sad. I'm in tears. I don't think I've made a single amends yet where I didn't break down as soon as I started it.
Yeah.
Which, for me, helps to remind me how much I care about what I'm doing. Right? Sometimes it's hard to make the amends when I'm trying to, like, read a paper. I'm like,
yeah, I got the ugly cry going on.
Oh, my God. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. The willingness definitely, yeah, you need it for so much of it, right? I like how you brought up the 8 though, because I really liked, I did, my list the same way, but it says that little bit in there, right? For those ones that we aren't willing, we pray until the willingness comes. And I have found that for myself to be like, that is the best way for willingness to come my way, right? And sometimes I have to pray longer than other times, but the more willing I become, the easier it just comes, and the easier it gets just to do it,
Yeah. And I really think too, my brain is I'm an addict, so I jump all over the place. Kind of going back to the 4 that you were talking about, that reminds me of when I was shown the resentment prayer in the back on 552, right? And like, okay, now you're going to pray for all these people, and it's going to help relieve you of these resentments so you can move on in your life. And I remember vividly having 2 people that I didn't want to forgive them.
Yeah.
I wanted to hate them forever. I don't know why. I really wanted that. And I was unwilling to pray for them. I just felt like they didn't deserve my prayer. I don't know. I was pretty pissed. Right? But again, being told and I am only going to get well by being willing to do all of these things that I don't want to do. And I also keep in mind, the back of my head, I'm still thinking I'm going to do everything right so I can prove to these people this doesn't work. So I promised myself that I would pray for these people. There was 2 people in mind. One was an ex-boyfriend and one was my bully from most of my school life. And I said that I would do whatever I needed to do to get well. And so I asked my higher power for the willingness to be able to pray for these people. And then I had the willingness to pray for these people. And the book in the back, it says, do it for 2 weeks. Do it even when they're just words and you don't really want it for them.
Yep.
And I had my list of resentments out, and I prayed for each and every single. It took a long time. I had a lot of resentments. It was a lot of time out of my day in the mornings. And I prayed for all these people. And in 2 weeks, 99% of them were gone. Like, I don't understand why it works. Thanks, Creator. Like, it does.
Yeah.
But those 2 didn't go away. And so I went to my sponsor, and I'm like, see, it doesn't work. She said, you have to remain willing. You have to keep trying. The hardest, it'll happen, but maybe it'll be longer than 2 weeks. And so I kept praying, and I kept praying for these people. And I remember in regards to my ex, I finally, I opened my book. I started praying. And it was the craziest feeling because for the first time since I had met this person, my brain felt empathy. And I didn't feel angry. And it was one of the most transformative moments of my recovery. And I'll never forget it. I was sitting at my kitchen table and I'm like, here we go again. I pray for so-and-so. I pray that they have all the happiness and serenity that I seek. I do want that for that. It was just this weird, light switch moment.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I went from being so angry to feeling sorry for them and feeling sorry for their struggles and really wanting them to find peace. It was just such a beautiful moment that I never would have had if I was unwilling to do what's suggested. And I think that that's my biggest takeaway in recovery is doing what other people who are succeeding suggest, whether you think it'll work or not, whether you agree with it or not. Yeah. For me, there was so many times where I'm like, this isn't going to work, but you have what I want, so I'll try it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Just the willingness to do that, right? I love that resentment prayer. I wasn't willing at all to make that amends to my mom. I wasn't even willing to look at it, right? And I actually had to write a custom resentment prayer for her.
Okay.
I have it in the page before I did the 4, and I had to customize it and very detailed customize. And yeah, it took a lot longer than those 2 weeks, right? But remaining willing was definitely the tricky part for me.
And how did you navigate through that? How did you remain willing through that tough time where you had such a hard relationship?
I was just ready for the pain to go away, that it was a lifetime of hurt and pain. I was just ready for it to be over, and I had spent so much time working so hard on this to get to this point. And again, too, I felt the urgency, I had to do it because she was moving out of the country, and my sponsor was like, look, what if you don't have this opportunity again? You need to do this. And so, all of that stuff combined gave me the willingness to just do what I had to do. It took me longer than it should have, but
better late than never.
Yeah.
And you got there.
Yeah, absolutely. So
And how freeing was that to finally be able to have the courage to do that and overcome it?
It was so freeing. You know, it changed everything. It changed everything, like every aspect of my life, my recovery, and just like years of everything. Like, even now, I want to be upset, but I can't. Like, you know, it worked. Like, I did that amends and I forgave and I moved forward. But I just see her and the situation so differently now, right? That compassion that develops, right?
Yeah.
And so it just changed everything, every aspect of life.
I love figuring things out. So the fact that like I can't figure out how God makes that happen, sometimes I'm just like, but why does it work?
How does it work?
How does it work? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's mind blowing, you know?
I wasn't going to bring this up, but it popped in my head. So obviously that's my higher power saying it should be said. Just when I thought I was going to get through an episode without crying. But I just think it's important to mention. Willingness, like, is just in so many different areas of life. So the instance that I will give you is that there's a friend of mine that I've known for a really long time. Friends on and off, in and out of addiction, like, you know how it is.
Yeah.
And so this person crossed my mind a few weeks ago. And the first, like, I didn't know why I thought about him. I just did. And then I thought to myself, I haven't thought about this person in a long time. Do I owe this person anytime I think of somebody that I haven't thought about in a long time, the first thing I say is, do I owe this person amends? And most of the time, the answer is yes. And I kind of reflected on the last few times that I had seen him, and I'm like, I probably owe this person an amends. What I didn't realize is the importance that God puts things in front of you at the right time for the right reason.
Yeah.
I did nothing with that thought, right? It was just a thought.
Yep.
And I found out the next day that he died.
Okay.
That day.
Yeah. That's hard.
And it's not an easy lesson, right? But at the same time, I'm really grateful that I have the capacity to experience it because it taught me a lot, right? Because now I know when you have a connection with a higher power, when you really work this program, right? Those intuitive thoughts, those God shots, like, they're real and they're everywhere. And it was really unfortunate, but it really showed me the importance of when something comes up, be willing, jump on it, take action.
Yeah.
Right? And that was really hard to go through. I think it's important to talk about, though.
Yeah, it's that hard stuff that is important to talk about, right? And, I think that even just from what I'm hearing, like, you learn so much just from that experience, right? And that's the magic of, like, the things God does for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just got to keep staying willing.
Yeah, it's strange how that happens, Something will pop in your head, and it's always there's always a purpose behind it. And the more it happens, I find the easier it is to try to listen to those things, but it's so new.
Well, and see, for me, like, that was the first, like, for me, like, God shots come in life, right? God will put someone in front of me, or God will, have a situation align, or, like, I'm actively looking for signs on what direction to go. But this is the first time where, and maybe it's because I've been really working on prayer and meditation recently, but this is the first time a thought came into I didn't realize that the stuff that rolls around in my brain could also be messages from the universe, right? So while it was hard, it was a really beautiful lesson because now I'm super aware of that.
That intuitive thought.
Yeah. Never really had that until.
Yeah.
Maybe I did and I just didn't know, but.
You'll be listening closer now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks. Yeah. It's not easy too, but.
It's those things that aren't easy that they're better. We grow through that uncomfortability,
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the main reasons why I really wanted to do this, right? No fluff, no crap, just two addicts talking about what it's like to be in recovery and going through it, right? And it's being able to get past that first 5-10 minutes of, oh my God, I'm on camera. Let's talk about things to actually kind of get to the core of our personalities. Just really cool stuff comes out. And I really hope that it helps people.
Yeah. No, I think it's awesome that you're doing this. I love the concept of it.
I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Absolutely.
Anything else you want to chat about?
I don't know. You got anything?
I think I'm pretty good on this one. I guess that just means we'll have to bring you back a second time for our new topic.
Yeah, for a new topic. Absolutely.
Perfect.
I mean, there's so much we could talk about on the how, the honesty, the open-mindedness, and the willingness. I feel like it attaches itself to all aspects of this program, right? And I think that's why they call it the how. Like, it talks about it being indispensable. Like, we need to have these 3 spiritual principles.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I believe, that we need to have these if we want to live a God-centered life and, be recovered, not just sober.
And that's the key.
Yeah.
Living a life of happiness and serenity.
Yeah.
Doesn't work
so
without
good.
the how.
No, it doesn't.
I've tried. It doesn't work.
I've tried to. It doesn't work at
my
all.
God.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on the show, babe.
Yeah.
Can't wait to
thanks so
have you
much
back.
for having me here.
Yay.
It's great.
What are we going to talk about next time? I don't know yet. Peace.